Hello everyone, AmyR here with Prairie Paper and Ink, and I am part of a blog hop today celebrating Waffle Flowers June release. Still can't believe it's June, that's so crazy. So I decided to use the new Spice Garden stamp set for my cards today. There was a bunch of sets that released, all of them I'm just obsessed with, but I can only do so much at once. So I went with this because I really wanted to do some ink blending. I love these images. They're by the same designer that did the Bouquet Builder 1. So of course I've been hoping there's going to be a Bouquet Builder 2 and 3 and you know. So I kept today's cards simple and I just started with this large piece of Bristol smooth cardstock. And I started stamping the images from the set onto it with Ink on 3's Juicy Clear Ink. And I would stamp a couple of them, coat them with white embossing powder, and without melting the embossing powder, I would stamp a few more. And once I have all of the main images stamped, I'm going to heat that with my heat tool just so I don't end up knocking off any of that embossing powder, because that's inevitably what's going to end up happening if I don't do this. So I'm going to melt this with my heat tool, and then I stamped one of the flower pots. The set comes with multiples, so you can kind of like build your own little scenes, use different little flower pots, etc. But I kept it simple and just used one of the flower pots, stamped that 3 times. And then there's a little flower in the set, which I wouldn't even have overly noticed, but I ended up having to Google images of like rosemary and sage and whatnot, because I was just curious, you know, kind of what shades of green. And I was sure, I was like, I think one of them does have little flowers, and they do. So I stamped the little flower multiple times on just the end of this scrap here and melted everything with my heat tool. And then I cut these areas just apart with my scissors so that I had each piece had just the same stamped images, because I want to do some ink blending, and this just saved me from trying to like bothering with trying to mask or, you know, exclude any areas that I didn't want certain colors on. I just quickly snip them apart and then they're good to go. So now I've got my grid paper here and my Distress Oxides, and I keep my little sponges for my Distress Oxides stored in, this is just a little binder, like a 6x8 binder, and those are little 2x2 Insta pocket pages. I'll have those linked in the supplies, but that's how I've been keeping my ink blending foams for the oxides stored, is just I stick them in those little pockets, and when I haven't done the newest set, but I've printed off labels with my little label maker, so I have one for each color, and when I'm done using them I just peel it off the applicator tool and I stick it in its little pocket and it's good to go. So I've been doing that for a few months now and it works for me. So for all of these, I've sped this up in the editing because it's pretty boring. I don't do anything fancy. The one thing I do really love about ink blending is, especially over heat embossed images, is one, you have the emboss resist, which just always is so much fun because it looks like nothing really at first when you've got white heat embossing on white cardstock, and then you add the ink blending, you know, and the image just pops. And 2, another reason I love this is you don't have to be skilled at coloring, or if you're not in the mood to color, or just coloring is something you struggle with, anyone can make ink blending look good. Whether you use oxides or distress inks or dye inks, you can just have fun with blending and you don't have to worry about it too much. So with all of these, I just blended on the color with all the different little like spices. I just used different shades of green, and the funny thing is I remembered just in time that there is an actual bundled sage color in the distress line, so I used that on one of them. And then for the little flower pots, I very lightly sponged on just a little bit of broken china. And then rather than mask off any areas to, you know, color the little area that would be dirt in those flower pots, I just smushed the lid into the ink pad and then picked it up with a water brush and painted it on. It's just simpler that way. And then I actually did that with the little flower centers too, with a little bit of Seedless Preserves Oxide ink and my water brush, just to add that little bit of color. So after everything was sponged and the little tiny watercolor areas were dry, I'm just taping all of the dies in place with washi tape, and I've separated all of the images further because I discovered they'll all fit in my little Sidekick machine, so I don't even have to bother with my larger die cut machine, which is nice because I have a ton to die cut, because I did doubles of all the images, 3 of the flower pots, and then a ton of the little flowers. So I just ran all of these through my little Sidekick machine to die cut absolutely everything, which didn't take very long at all since I'm using just my little baby Sidekick. I'm obsessed with this machine. I have gotten 1,000 times more use out of it than I thought I would. I kind of thought it was more of a gimmick and I would use it maybe once or twice, and I find I'm using it several times a week. So after I did all my die cutting, I have my card bases, and I am sponging more ink onto this. And in this process, I discovered I am not the greatest ink blender person. I need to, take a leaf out of Laura Basson's book, and she is like the queen of sponging of inks. Like, just... I watch her videos and the softness she gets, and it's always like so perfect, and I just love it. I don't know. I think the biggest thing is I have too heavy of a hand and I don't have enough patience. So to fix that though, when I don't get the, the smooth, perfect blends I want, I add splatter. It kind of helps cover it up. So I sponged on the ink. I splattered on a little bit of water, let that sit for a minute, and then picked up with the paper towel. And then I smushed the ink onto an acrylic block and added a little bit more water and then splattered on that color. And that really helped to kind of conceal areas that weren't perfect. And I ended up doing that 3 times for 3 different card bases using 3 different colors. Just didn't bother to film each one because it's redundant. And then for these flower pots, I took one of my pen blades and cut just along the top of the flower pot, just below the little dirt area, so that I've created an opening in all of these so I can easily tuck in all of these different spices into their little flower pots. And then once I was kind of happy with how I had them arranged, I flipped it over and used that same washi tape just to tape them into place so that they're not going to wiggle around when I add all of my foam adhesive. So I'm just going to tuck those right into that little slit I created, and then flip this back over and tape it into place with my washi tape. People have been asking when the washi tapes I use, like if I could link to it, like what brand is it? I honestly, this one is a Doodlebug brand, but it came out years ago. I kind of work my way from oldest to newest with my washi tapes, and I use them for things like this. You guys, I see me taping my dies into place, etc. This is the main way I use washi tape. Rather than actually on my creations, I just use it to tape things in place. So after I've got everything taped into place, I now have my card bases here with their sponging and their splattering. And then I decided to adhere all these little flowers before adhering everything to my card base, just to keep things simple. So I just added little dollops of Simon's Craft Tacky Glue to this image, and then I'm just going to press all those little flowers into it and then let it sit and dry for a couple minutes. I'm just adding little clusters on them. I just thought it gave it that little extra something. So I'm going to adhere all those into place, and then to adhere all of these to my card bases, I just have little foam squares. So I'm just going to flip all of these over and add these foam squares and then pop these into place onto my card bases. So keeping everything fairly clean and simple compared to what I usually do, adding everything under the sun. So after I got all of these popped into place, I pulled out just one of the sentiments from the set. There's a few little sentiments, a couple of labels as well, and there's actually a cute little label stamp and die that you can stick in there too. But I decided to just stamp directly on the card base. I'm just stamping the little word hello, and I'm using VersaFine ONYX black ink for that. So stamping that into place on all of my card fronts. And then I decided to stamp the coordinating images on the inside of the card using the same shades of green I used to sponge on the outside. And I'm just going to ink up each of these stamps, ink it up once with the Oxide, stamp it. Without re-inking it, I'm going to stamp it a second time so I get that second generation of ink. And I decided while I was doing that to pull out some envelopes and do the exact same thing on the envelopes, just to kind of tie it all together. Since I'm keeping everything fairly simple and I wanted to use white envelopes, I thought it'd be cute to kind of stamp those on the envelopes as well, just to give them that little extra something. So I went along and did that with all of these images, finished off with those little flowers, and then as a final little bit of embellishment, I pulled out some Studio Caudia sparkling crystals from my stash and sprinkled those rather liberally on all of these card fronts. And just an FYI, I knew this was going to happen, but for those that aren't aware, when you apply adhesive over, whether it be Distress Oxide or Distress inks or even some dye inks, the adhesive will either absorb or push away that ink, which is what it did with the Oxide. It kind of pushed it away so that the crystals end up basically remaining clear, which I'm totally okay with. I thought it just kind of gave it a different little bit of a look. I really liked how that turned out. So that is what I did for all 3 cards today, and as always, I will have a link below the video to my blog post with links to all the supplies used. Like I said in the beginning, this is part of a blog hop, so I will have links to everyone else in my blog post that's linked below the video, so you can check that out below if you're interested. Thank you all so much for watching and subscribing and thumbs upping and commenting on my videos. I really appreciate it, and I will see you all very soon in the next one. Bye!